Shana Tova, Gemar Chatima Tova. Gemar Chatima Tova. All right, just making sure we're still awake here. The school year recently kicked off in our home with my children beginning third grade, middle school, and my oldest daughter beginning high school. Crazy to think that she was just a toddler when we moved here and joined the Bethel community 12 years ago. Her high school experience started with her first trip to Israel. Golda Ak Academy's 9th grade trip to Israel, Kol Nidre, launched them into high school, creating new friendships in the process, building a meaningful connection to Israel, the land, the people, the country. And Kayla would call us regularly to tell us about the experience, where they hiked that day, who they met, what food she successfully was able to order in Hebrew for any given meal. Well, at the men's club annual golf outing a few weeks ago, I got a call from her on my cell phone. Did you know, by the way, you aren't allowed to use your phone on a golf course? This was only my third time golfing. I had no idea. I learned the hard way. Kayla was calling from the building's bomb shelter, where she gathered with her classmates because sirens blared in Jerusalem as they were getting ready for bed. The summer began with Israel and Iran at war with each other, and as Kayla left for camp, she asked if this trip would still be happening. We told her that we hoped. And things changed so quickly over the summer, youth group and summer trips back on, Mishlachat being able to return to camps as counselors. Before she left for the trip, we went over what to do if she heard a siren. And for a moment, stop being a teenager and actually listen to the adults. We were hopeful the trip would happen, but also worried about Israel at this moment being her first visit, her first experience. But Israel at this moment, responding to sirens, running to a ma'amad, if that's part of what Israelis experience, so that is part of the Israel experience. 2 years ago, as that same child was preparing to become a bat mitzvah, I walked home from synagogue with her following Shmini Atzeret services on October 7th and tried explaining to her as much information as I knew, pockets of information that I had received each time as a wave of congregants entered the sanctuary. When we returned home that afternoon, she asked if we could hang an Israeli flag outside of our house. I wanted my daughter to visit Israel to deepen her connection, to know that it's not just a place that we talk about, a reason to eat falafel, a flag you're familiar with. I wanted for her to experience the land, the culture, her faith all around her, to deepen her connection just as mine was deepened when I lived there. I wanted her connection to be about more than just war, difficult headlines associated with it. For that seemingly is the connection to Israel that has consumed so many of us over the past 2 years. And her connection was deepened. 2 years later, that flag remains up outside of our home. And over these past 2 years, it's been a conversation starter, a jumping off point for deep and sometimes difficult but important conversations with neighbors, Catholic and Muslim, about my relationship as a rabbi and as a Jew, and the Jewish community's relationship to Israel. Maybe that's what flags or signs are meant for, to be conversation starters. Leading up to the holiday season last year, we hung a banner outside of our building that still remains. The banner reads, "We stand with Israel and we pray for peace. Bring them home now." Prior to that first high holidays following October 7th, a holiday season filled with angst and anxiety, fear and concern, a season meant for joy after a year of mourning, at a time when anti-Israel sentiment was sky high. We wanted to share our belief as a community, to continue to center the return of hostages in our prayers, and to reaffirm our deep connection to Jews, to Jewish peoplehood, to the Jewish state. Some were comforted by this banner. Others questioned what took so long. Some wondered if the language of a slogan, a few words on a sign, could express the nuance of a relationship with the land and with the people, but not necessarily the actions of a government. Why have a sign at all? Maybe it's the culture of suburban living, with front yards and landscaping, mouths of mulch inviting stake signs of belief and belonging. We do it so people know where we stand on racial injustice and on abortion access, on which candidates for office we support, to make it even more clear which candidates we do not support. These frontline declarations are a way to share with the public our own private opinions. But it's like if we don't declare to the world what we stand for on a 2-by-3-foot piece of plastic, then people make assumptions about what we stand for or don't. As if we need to make sure our roots and our values are rooted in our soil. Similarly, synagogues, including our own, have become accustomed to sending out emails or social media posts to react to every event happening in the world. Like our institutions have become Reuters, places to share breaking news and press releases. Again, with the fear that if we do not, then do people think we don't care? It's a culture of having to declare from the rooftops what we believe, lest people come to that conclusion for themselves, even if we cannot fully articulate that belief in a 240-character tweet or a 15-second TikTok video or a yard sign. Towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 27, Moses instructs the people of Israel, saying that they shall observe all the mitzvot God had commanded of them. But then he continues, immediately after crossing the Jordan, entering the promised lands, "V'hakemota lecha avanim gedolot, v'sata otam basid." You shall erect large stones and coat them with plaster. "V'chatavta alehem et kol divrei haTorah hazot." You should inscribe on them all the words of this Torah. These stones were plastered so the words written were permanent and could never be changed. And while we understand and believe that halakha, Jewish law, is an evolving process, the Torah is telling us that literally, not just metaphorically, the mitzvot should be set in stone. My first thought was, how big are these stones that they could fit the entire Torah? I think of Israeli artists in the Jerusalem artist colony who specialize in Hebrew micrography, writing out full parshiot on a piece of art. Ramban had the same concern. Nachmanides, the 13th century Torah commentator from Catalonia, explained that only a brief list of commandments were written, rather than a detailed rendering. Essentially, he was teaching us just to offer a slogan, and the explanation, the nuance, follows in conversation, in learning, and in dialogue. Because signs and statements aren't meant to be the be-all and end-all. They're meant to create conversation, discussion, something we so desperately need right now in society. And we're here a year later, and you'll notice that this high holidays, that banner outside remains up. The wording exactly the same. A year later, since those high holidays, a war continues. It has not led to additional hostages coming home since the previous ceasefire deal last winter. There have been conversations about lack of aid in Gaza, counts of starvation. Israel recently targeted Hamas offices in Qatar, most recently launched an increased ground operation in Gaza City, causing more people to flee. Hamas, once again using humans as shields, claims that they've spread out the hostages who remain in captivity throughout Gaza City. to put their lives in even more danger. All the while, after 2 years of war, sirens have gone off regularly throughout Israel as rockets continue to fall from Hamas, and then Hezbollah, and then the Houthis, and then Iran. In 2 years, since October 7th, since I had that conversation with my daughter and we put that Israeli flag up in front of our house, Hamas still controls Gaza. Hostages still remain in captivity. We yearn for them to return home. Settler violence in the West Bank has increased. Netanyahu remains prime minister. And most Israelis want an end to this war. Over the summer, a poll by the Israel Democracy Institute found that close to 3/4 of Israelis, including an unprecedented majority of those affiliated with Netanyahu's Likud party, supported a deal that would end the war and bring all hostages home. And we enter this holiest of days with concern, for me, optimism, hope, anticipation. For over the past several days, I've been anxiously checking the news to see if the new proposed 20-point Gaza peace plan would take effect, if Hamas would agree to the conditions which would immediately end this war, return all the hostages home, bring needed aid to Gaza, and Hamas's rule so that Gaza could be rebuilt under new leadership, in hopes that one day the final point of that plan be realized, to establish a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians to agree on a political horizon for peaceful and prosperous coexistence. And so this high holidays, it's a very different moment in Israel and Gaza here in America, but to me the message of the sign remains the same. Some appreciate that this banner remains outside in front of our building as our continued communal commitments and connection and relationship to Israel as an institution, as a synagogue, connection that dates back to the very establishment of the Jewish state when Bethel was only a year old. Others may be upset, suggesting that at this moment in this war, maybe alternative language would be more appropriate. Maybe language should be more nuanced. Still, this sign reads, "We pray for peace," and shares the words of prayer that we say multiple times daily. Liturgy that appears in the Machzor Vitri, the oldest complete prayer book manuscript that we have, dating to the 12th century. Osei shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. May the one who brings peace on high grant peace to us, to all Israel, to all who dwell on earth. Liturgy that we've been saying multiple times daily for at least 900 years. A yearning for shalom, for wholeness, to fix a broken world. Liturgy that we say because it is not yet realized. Surely, I would think a sign that says we pray for peace is clear, right? And we've given sermons about peace. We've signed petitions, posted on social media, spoken from the Bima about a need for increased aid in Gaza during this war. Continue to raise awareness about our hostages still being held, prayed for their release daily. Shared a concern of a lack of accountability by the government for increased settler violence. Organized fundraisers to support kibbutzim that have been destroyed, offer programming throughout the year that emphasize Ahavat Yisrael. One can easily, should conclude where we stand. So what is it about a sign or a banner? Something so common on the lushly manicured streets of our towns. I can tell you this. The clergy of the 3 synagogues in South Orange shared a joint statement earlier this year because all 3 are host sites for universal pre-K in the district, believing and partnering with the district to provide additional space to offer free, high-quality preschool education for all families. We shared this statement last spring because there was a petition circulating to pressure the Board of Education to allow families to opt out of being placed in these synagogues and placed elsewhere due to discomfort by some of our synagogue's signage in relationship with Israel. Here's the problem. Our sign reads and still reads, "We stand with Israel, we pray for peace, bring them home now," with an Israeli flag. The signs in front of the other institutions at the time, "Love peace, bring them home," and an Israeli flag. One people with one heart. I would suggest that these are hardly controversial messages. Nuanced? No. But they speak to our deep connection to Achdut, Jewish peoplehood, a deep commitment to the mitzvah of Piyon Shvuim, redeeming those in captivity, a love and desire for peace. The problem, I fear, they were public statements acknowledging the Jewish people's deep communal connection to Israel. And I get that each of us have different, unique connections to Israel. But this petition seemingly came from the outrage that the Jewish community acknowledged that connection at all. To say I stand with Israel doesn't mean I don't care about the pain and suffering that others have experienced. As a Jew, I'm deeply connected to Zion, to our faith's longing for a vibrant Jewish community in our ancestral homeland, highlighted in volumes of rabbinic literature, referenced daily in our liturgy. And as a Jew, I understand the sacredness of each life. And like the shofar blasts demand of us, we constantly need to open our hearts to all human suffering, even and especially in the midst of war. But saying I stand with Israel means I believe in Israel, what Israel is and what Israel can be, at the Israel I dream of. I don't want to be a political analyst. Nobody wants or needs a rabbi to be that. There are plenty of podcasts you can listen to. But the Israel I dream of. You see, Rabbi Daniel Hartman, modern Orthodox rabbi who serves as president of the Shalom Hartzman Institute in Jerusalem, which among other things trains pluralistic rabbis to serve the diversity of Jewish expression in Israel. He was asked during the month of Elul last month what American rabbis should share with their communities during the high holidays, how to explain what it means to stand with Israel as signage suggests. And as someone who is very critical of Netanyahu and the government from the outset of this war, he paused for a moment before answering. Share about the Israel you dream of. Doesn't mean ignore the reality of the moment. Doesn't mean don't be critical of the government when necessary. But the Israel one dreams of, he says, that's what we cling to. And he added, there could be a huge gap at times between the Israel I am yearning for and the Israel I have. In the Amidah, 3 times daily we pray, Baruch atah Adonai bonei Yerushalayim. Praise are you, God, builder of Jerusalem. Shlomo HaKohen explains that this refers to Yerushalayim Shalmata and Yerushalayim Shalmala, an earthly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem that has been rebuilt, the Jerusalem that's a vibrant holy city to all, and a heavenly Jerusalem, a spiritual Jerusalem, a Jerusalem that embodies the values that are a core part of who we are as a people, a Yerushalayim that we constantly still try to build. But also as a people, we know that we waited 2,000 years for the Israel we wanted. And compared to the Israel that we didn't have, that gap couldn't have been bigger. But we talked about it, prayed about it, and whether it's words of tefillot or a sign outside of our spaces, we still do so today. Because all that I have to say doesn't fit on a yard sign. It's way more nuanced than a slogan can capture. But to me, having a sign still matters. It defines a relationship that is about more than any elected government or any policy or any war. It's just as the psalmist cried out in Psalm 137, "Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yemini." If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. It speaks to a deep connection to Israel, but also connection to the Israel I yearn for, the Israel I dream of. Signs and flags don't mean that any place, any connection is beyond criticism. Just ask the hundreds of thousands of Israelis protesting their government every week, proudly waving the Israeli flag when they do so. But they start conversations. It's not the whole message, but it's a meaningful signal. And that's why the banner remains in front of our building. Maybe because it lacks nuance, it remains flawed. But nuance comes from conversation, from learning, from dialogue, not from signs. I talk about this war with my children and add that nuance, each in an age-appropriate manner. And I encourage each to do the same in a way that's appropriate. Because to me, Israel is complicated, and to me, Israel is beautiful, and that's what I want my children to see. And that can't be conveyed in a banner. We're planning on traveling to Israel this December, our first family trip. Kayla called us from Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv before boarding her return flight home. She shared all about her experience. She said she was sad to leave the trip, but okay because she knew that she would be back soon. Even during our time living in Jerusalem, while I was in rabbinical school, I, thank God, never experienced sirens, never had to retreat to a bomb shelter. That may have shaped my relationship to Israel in a certain way. But for my almost 15-year-olds, it deepened a connection for her, helped her dream of an Israel worth yearning for, an Israel that can one day live side by side with her neighbors in peace, even if such dreams can't be expressed on a yard sign. Shana Tova.